up. I think we can take it a little higher. Come on, everybody. I love you, Jesus. Yes, yes. Worship and adore. I worship and adore you. What do you want to say?
Please remain standing as I invite Reverend Dr. J.W. Champon to say the opening prayer.
Please let's pray. Our Lord and our King, we praise and bless your name once more for bringing us together after this short recess. We thank you for refreshing us. We thank you for what you have in store for us. We want to lift especially our facilitator before you. Continue to bless her with deeper understanding and insight and strength so that she'll be able to give us the lecture and help us to a better understanding of the issues at hand. Thank you for hearing us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second lecture of the 13th R.P. Baffour Memorial Lecture. And as I said in the morning, it's under the theme Superintelligent AI Agents, an existential threat to human race navigating through the intricacies of the AI revolution. And of course, our distinguished speaker is Dr. Mercy Nyamewa Esiedu. This afternoon's lecture, which is the second, shall be on case studies of AI applications and the potential of superintelligence, benefits, risks, and challenges. But before we invite her, it's my honor to welcome the chairman of the governing council of this university, Chamfo Asafobuache Ajima Bunsu, for his remarks. Shall we please applaud him?
Thank you very much. Let's resume our seats. I guess say a few words. We are already in the middle of the program. There's no new introduction. Just to tell you, we have Mercy again with us, and she will continue with our discussions on AI, focusing on applications. So I would encourage you to be very attentive, and let's have very good discussions, so at least we can see how we would, after the day or tomorrow, Saturday, I think, we'll be closing, have some actionable items on our hands in terms of how we deal with AI at the national level. So with that, I would sincerely invite Mercy to take the floor, and then let's continue on having that good lecture. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So, earlier this morning, we spoke about artificial narrow intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and artificial superintelligence, and looked at the delineations between them, as well as where we currently are in the cycle, so a little bit of background on the birth of AI, going through AI summers and winters, and the current areas around generative AI and deep learning. And the idea that we are either on a breakthrough to AGI and ASI, or might go towards incremental progress, or the third AI winter. So I'll switch a little bit and talk about some case studies of applications in my field, which is health and AI. And at the end, I'll put forward some discussions of where superintelligence could be helpful and where there might be risks involved as well. So before I start on this talk, I wanted to give a little bit of background on why I do this type of work. So I was raised in Ghana, right in Kumasi, in Fumeswa, and went to KNUST primary and JSS. This is a picture from my time there during one of the marching events. And following that, I went to Holy Child School, senior secondary school, where I studied science. And at that time, I really wanted to go into medicine because I had had relatives who had passed away before their time due to potentially lack of access to the right technology at the right time. So I was very interested in doing medicine and got into KNUST Medical School. And just about that time, a scholarship very much out of nowhere came, and I received a full scholarship to the University of Rochester and decided to take the opportunity. But I still wanted to work on this idea of health involving technology and looking at how I could bring it back. So I majored in biomedical engineering, went on to do a PhD in biomedical engineering at Duke University with a global health focus. And I'll talk about some of the work I did there, and then followed up by going and delving deeper into deep learning models at MIT. And about 3 years ago, I joined Google to focus on responsible AI, health, and currently human-centered AI. My trajectory has kind of taken me from biomedical device development, medical image processing, neural networks, natural language processing for clinical notes, and large language models. But these have always been on the intersection of health equity, medical devices, and artificial intelligence. So there have been a lot of talks on bias and mitigating bias in AI for a while. And a lot of them start on this notion of data collection and data preparation. We should get more data. We should find diverse data sets. And there's also solutions around making our models work for debiasing with techniques, evaluating the models, and post-hoc deployment. But what about if there's limited access to medical devices that generate the data in the first place due to lack of maintenance or just lack of resources? Or if there's inaccessible and disconnected health records that are not digitized to be used for machine learning applications. There's also the issue of disparate quality and disparate use cases. So a model that might have been trained in the US on what's shown here, a 3D mammogram, translated to Ghana, which might be using 2D mammograms, might not work as well. Use case-wise, mammograms are usually used in the US for screening. In Ghana, they are usually used for diagnosis. So then you have a distribution shift in how the model is used, which will impact performance. So my case here was that let's go back to the data generating devices. And this does not apply just to health, it applies to everything. How can we create devices that make health accessible to diverse patient cohorts, and ensure that the features that are collected by these devices are accurate across patient cohorts? So for instance, something that uses optical measures may work worse on darker skin, and we need to make sure they work well across the board. And that we also need to make sure that the data from these devices are accessible for AI modeling. We talked a lot about superintelligence in the morning, and it's exciting and has potential to improve lives in the future if and when we get there. But in the meantime, we should really ensure basic needs are met, and that we are using the incredible advancements already made in technology to improve lives now. So what I'm going to talk about touches on how can we make health technologies that increase accessibility to healthcare and generate representative data for AI. I'll try not to go too much into the details since there's not a lot of time to discuss everything, but I'll talk about 5 projects. The Colorscope, where we use devices to screen for cervical cancer, improving ultrasound images with generative networks, AI for maternal health, benchmark data sets, and the NTRCS study that looked at AI perceptions in Africa. Starting with the Colorscope, a toolbox for accessible cervical cancer screening. So a little bit of background here. Cervical cancer is a slow-growing, highly preventable cancer that starts in the uterus, which means it can be hidden until it's too late. And this map here shows the cervical cancer global incidence. You can see Ghana is in dark blue, and a lot of sub-Saharan Africa is in dark blue, showing very high incidence. And even more dire is that the mortality rates are just as high. In Ghana, cervical cancer is the second leading death in the country. The first is breast cancer. When I was working on this, cervical cancer was number 1. It's now shifted down to number 2 behind breast cancer. And it's highly unjust. There are 660,000 new cases each year, over 50% mortality. 90% of this is in Africa and Southeast Asia because so many people are unscreened. And yet, it's slow-growing, preventable, and early screening is one of the largest returns on investment. So why doesn't this work? You have your high-tech versus low-tech cervical cancer screening too. So in the US, there's colposcopy, which is imaging of the cervix, which can be expensive and unwieldy. And a lot of countries in lower middle income countries, the WHO recommends visual inspection with acetic acid. It's cheap, it's portable, but it's subjective and has much lower accuracy and doesn't provide an avenue for data digitization. The management process is also resource intensive. The patient has to come in for screening with a pap smear and HPV test. They have to come in for diagnosis with a colposcopy followed by pathology. Then they have to come in for treatment. So there's a lot of laws to follow up. So what we wanted to understand is, can we design something that is accessible, low cost, but high quality, allows us to collect digital images to provide perhaps more objective machine learning models that could assist in diagnosis and reduce the amount of times the patient has to come in. And so the spy pen was actually what inspired the design of our colposcope. My PhD advisor was looking through a plain magazine and saw this camera at the tip of the pen and said, why couldn't we use that to look at cervical cancer screening as well? And what would that mean? And this led to the development of visualization tools, the Colorscope and Pocket Colposcope, a low-cost tool that enables provider-based and self-imaging of the cervix. We developed mobile applications that could enable data storage and tracking, and AI methods to reduce subjectivity and enable transitioning to community health workers. This is the Pocket Colposcope developed in our lab, and it's WHO approved. They went through a number of cycles and clinical studies to show that it was as accurate as the current standard of care, which costs $5,000 to $20,000 compared to this $500 version. And we found that it was just as accurate in making clinical decisions. But we also wanted to solve this issue of patients feeling vulnerability from using the speculum and having another person watch them. But the problem with the spy pen idea was that you could not just insert it because you needed something to expand the vaginal walls to see the cervix. And yet, the speculum worked well, but it was painful, it led to vulnerability and discomfort. So this is how the speculum looks like. I think probably a number of people here are familiar with it. If you are female, it was first developed in 1859. And if you think of all the progress we've made in computing and technology, we are in 2024 with virtual reality, and it's not changed much. So we wanted to create a disruptive technology that could enable self-screening, and through a series of processes came up with the color scope, which allowed for the first time users to self-screen their own cervixes. So this shows a video of how that works. We developed partners in several countries, about 10 countries, and screened over 1,000 women as of when I graduated, and there's a lot more now. But we didn't stop there. We wanted to understand how we could use this for machine learning and hopefully to assist diagnosis. So cervical cancer has sources of contrast, which give you there's acetic acid imaging, green illumination imaging, and Lugol's iodine, which show different features for normal cervixes and high-grade or cancerous cervixes. So you can see a difference visually. And the primary features here we were looking at were color and texture. And back then we had quite little data, so we used feature extraction methods to extract shape, color, texture, and put that into machine learning models to classify them. And we found that with our models, that we were able to achieve accuracy that was as good as experts who had looked at the same images. We increased the data set to a lot more and went towards using more novel machine learning models like deep learning, and found that we're also able to show high performance in those areas on a holdout data set as well. One of my favorite things about this project was really being able to have impact interacting with patients and clinicians, and we had mobile clinics. We were working with mobile clinics in Peru that went to the patients and were able to take our portable device to do screening right there and ask them to come into the clinic so that the patient didn't have to come to the clinic first. We also worked with Greater Accra Regional Hospital on some studies, as well as the Catholic Hospital in Baffour that does extensive cervical cancer screening, and found very high acceptances amongst the people we screened with the device. Moving beyond technology, one of the goals of this was to educate people on cervical cancer and awareness. And we held an art exhibition at the university where people could come and interact and talk about the cervix and reproductive health. So it was very important to the team to not just top our technology, but to go beyond that to use innovative methods to create awareness. And this also led to a documentary called The Invisible Organ Documentary, and won a number of awards and media recognitions. So moving beyond this, I'll talk a little bit about Sonogon improving portable ultrasound images with generative networks. Diagnostic ultrasound is non-ionizing with several applications. We have fetal imaging, which a lot of people know about. You can use it to see babies in utero and stage them and diagnose any issues. But you can also use ultrasound for looking at tumors and detecting tumors, as well as looking at cardiovascular issues. Ultrasound has progressed quite a bit from the 2000s to the 2020s, where we've gone from bulky machines to handheld devices that are really improving access to care. And a lot of these are being used in low resource settings where people can't actually get to clinics, and you're able to use portable devices in villages and communities. A little bit of an issue here, though, is that the handheld devices have a lower voltage, which means they don't penetrate as deep into the body compared to the high voltage devices, which are the larger ones. So the question here was, how do we improve the penetration depth using machine learning tools? So the idea was to be able to use a software-based approach to translate the low voltage images to high voltage images. And we used a generative adversarial network which generates the high voltage images and uses a discriminator generator network, where the discriminator learns to differentiate, the generator learns to generate the high voltage images, and the discriminator teaches it to do it better by being able to differentiate what is real and what is not real until it gets confused because the generator is doing such a good job. So we used some data sets from some ultrasound phantoms captured from low and high voltages and run them through this generative model shown here. And some of the outcomes from this, you see a low voltage image here where there's a cyst or a representation of a cyst between 3 centimeters and 5 centimeters. And with the high voltage, you can see that much clearly, and you see that a bit less clearly in the low voltage. But the model was able to take in the low voltage image and translate that to look very closely like the high voltage image. We did find, however, that there were some hallucinations that happened with specularity, and it was difficult to identify some of those, so it wasn't perfect. So moving on from ultrasound, I'll talk a little bit of some of the work I've been doing at Google on AI for health that we've just started, and looking at maternal health specifically. So one of the things that I've been interested in is how do wearables allow us to potentially find new digital biomarkers based on the longitudinal data. So imagine you have an Apple Watch or a tracker or some kind of Fitbit device, Garmin, and it measures your resting heart rate, your sleep, your step count, and other factors like that on a per minute cycle. So you have this data which during pregnancy collects it over the 280 days of pregnancy, and it's very data rich. So we wanted to understand if there was anything that could allow us to determine whether there would be negative outcomes during pregnancy. And we started with mood disorders like postpartum depression. So these time series data sets measured from wearable devices, they present extensive longitudinal, passively collected data, and they could be potentially used for personalized health. So we are very interested in using these to personalize large language model agents for health. And I was specifically wanting to understand whether we could discover things in the pregnancy and postpartum, because we had quite a number of data sets from people who were pregnant, and we could see, looking at this graph here on your right, shows how resting heart rate changes during pregnancy. So you have a rise in resting heart rate, and then around 5 weeks it drops, then it continues to increase till about 7 weeks before birth, and then decreases. And for healthy people, the resting heart rate is in gray, and for various stages of unhealth, you see that in the different colors. So we might actually be able to infer something here, because we are seeing higher resting heart rates when people are unhealthy. So looking at mood disorders specifically, the motivation for this was that 1 in 8 women experience postpartum depression, with 3 times higher likelihood of suicidal behavior amongst women who experience postpartum depression in the US, and 85% of them have been unscreened. So we took these features, looked at how they changed for the different outcomes here, which were anxiety, sadness, and depression, and also looked across different demographics, so different age groups. Unfortunately, most of the people in this cohort were non-Hispanic white that was most of the customer base, showing the high need for data from diverse users. And we were able to get outcomes like when they gave birth, whether they were preterm or late term, and whether they had BP disorder, blood clots, or depression and other things. We focused on depression, anxiety, and sadness, and developed a machine learning pipeline to predict it. One of the things I want to call out here is we used a generative network called the time gun to generate synthetic data to complement the real data here, which allowed us to have a balanced data set, showing the potential of some of these generative models to improve accuracies when data is scarce. And our results here, we are able to show that with the model that we developed, we had about a 0.85 AUC in predicting anxiety, 0.92 in predicting whether someone was sad, and 0.96 in predicting clinical depression, which from a wearable, that was really exciting. We were also able to do some studies to look at which features were most important for the model to use, so we could discover biomarkers, and things like sleep, heart rate came to the top. And we're also able to show that people who fell in depression or anxiety or sadness were separable from the rest of the cohort. It was also important for us to show that performance was consistent across different subgroups. And we found that for certain outcomes like sadness and depression, it was, but for anxiety, we had unequal performance, specifically around age and race and BMI. I'll now switch pace a bit to move from our applications in health to creating data sets that can be used to evaluate language models. One of the things that we really wanted to understand was how large language models work on tropical and infectious diseases. And the motivation behind this was when we started evaluating these models within Google, we were using a lot of US-based benchmarks. So there was a lot of news about how large ChatGPT takes the bar exam and passes, how new medical chatbots were working really well and answering questions really well, and most of those were from US-based benchmarks. But one must consider distribution shifts when you go beyond places like the US in terms of disease prevalence. So for instance, malaria may be more common in Ghana, but less common in the US data sets, but the flu is more common in the US. There's also cultural context, different types of diet and nutrition, physical activity, family-based care culture, language and linguistic style. Resources and infrastructure differ, availability of certain drugs, and even the names of drugs, traditional methods and herbal medicine, as well as religious versus Western approaches to care. In addition, there's health guidelines that differ from the WHO for different countries, and what may be considered fair in the US may not be considered the same. So in the US, for instance, there's a lot of focus on race, but less so in Ghana, whereas we might want to focus on fairness across ethnic groups. For this work, we focus primarily on disease prevalence, but I think it's important to really consider the other areas when you are evaluating large language models for use cases. So here we looked at understanding how large language models perform on tropical and infectious diseases and what contextual information impacts performance. And we developed the data set manually by identifying diseases of interest, specific and general symptoms related to the disease, locations of high incidence, and risk factors associated with the disease. So a sample of what goes into the data set would be a persona who has a sleeping sickness diagnosis. And here we have the patient is a 28-year-old male reporting with fever, severe headaches, irritability, fatigue, and has developed a skin rash, which is a specific symptom and shows sign of confusion. The patient lives in Uge province, which is a location of high incidence, and has the risk or lifestyle factor of owning domestic animals. So we created this for about 50 different tropical and infectious diseases and tested them on our internal models, mainly Gemini and our medical-based large language model. So the dashed line in red is how the models perform on US-based questions, and that's almost 90%. And here you see how they perform on tropical and infectious diseases, which is much lower for both the general model and surprisingly even lower for medical trained models. And a lot of people were surprised that the medically trained models did even worse than the general model. And some of that might be because the medical models are being further constrained on data sets that might not be representative. Besides this, we also compared it to expert performance. So we brought on experts across different countries and mainly West Africa and East Africa, and had them also respond to the data sets we developed. So we wanted to know if they were presented with these symptoms, what diagnosis would they provide? And we compared that to the model performance. So despite the model's limitations, we actually found that it outperformed the experts, except in one scenario. So if we looked at the average of the experts, or whether the majority vote of the experts, the model outperformed both of those cases. But then if we looked at taking any one of the experts, so if one expert was correct, we gave all the experts a full score, which you might consider it cheating for the experts, but I considered it more of a round table of experts from different backgrounds versus the general model. And that was the only time that the experts actually did better than the model, but individually or on average, they did not. Looking at how it worked for different diseases, from trachoma, rabies, HIV, malaria, helminths, we found that the LLMs actually perform best when you include location and risk factor, but the per disease variance is high for diseases that are not general, so diseases that are either specific to certain regions or have very general symptoms. So this data set is available online for use. There's 11,000 questions across 52 diseases with clinical and consumer variations. And experts have rated it as high on accuracy, completeness, timeliness, and diversity across tropical and infectious diseases with limitations in multimodality. So a lot of experts wanted us to include images as well. And you can find them in these papers that we've published on a toolbox for surfacing health equity harms in Nature Medicine. We also worked on one of the largest studies on large language models in healthcare on the continent, motivated by this work, in collaboration with groups like Masakane, Ghana NLP, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Sisonke Biotech, and the Federation of African Medical Students Association. And for this, we developed 15,000 questions and answers across 32 specialties from 16 countries and 60 medical schools. And this is the coverage that we have. So we have mostly around Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and a few others. And we look at the results for how different large language models perform on this data set versus on the US data set. This work was used to improve our internal models, so we're able to test large language models like Gemini and Gemma, find that they were limited, and use it to improve the models on these areas. And it was used to also train MedGemma, which is our medical-based language model, and won an award at a machine learning conference for social impact. I wanted to put a call out here for the next steps for this project. So we are expanding to multilinguality and multimodality. So we are looking at images, we are looking at different languages. Most of the previous work was done in English. We are looking at local languages and code switching. And we are open for collaboration, so join us if you are interested. And the final thing I'll touch on is our work on the NTIAS study, where we looked at experts and general population perspectives on AI for health in Africa to understand opportunities, best practices, and fairness indicators when deploying AI for health. This work looked at 672 members of the general population / lay persons across 5 countries who we conducted surveys on, and 50 experts in AI ML, health providers, policymakers, and public health researchers. And one of the questions we asked was, how does fairness and bias look like? Like I mentioned, in the US, we look at gender, race, sex, socioeconomic status, but what else is there? And this work was motivated by work from colleagues I have in Google who were looking at how fairness for large language models works in India. And what they had found was looking at castes. So India has different castes, which is kind of like ethnicities, but depending on inputting a certain caste into the model, it would provide a negative or positive sentiment. So it provided negative sentiment, which is a negative, I guess, a negative feeling on certain castes like Dalits and higher sentiments on other castes. They also looked at religion. So the model inherently, without any training, had negative sentiments on Buddhism, on Hindu, and on Islam, and positive sentiments on Christianity and Jain, which I'm not quite sure what religion that is, but it just goes to show that these models have intrinsic built-in biases that could really sway them, and this would be relevant for any super intelligent agent that's built. We wouldn't want it to have biases against certain groups of people. They also found that most of things that were, for instance, if you asked a model to generate an image of Indian food, it would generate food from only one part of India and ignore food from other parts. So that motivated us, and we looked at what kinds of fairness criterion to look at for the continent. And these fairness criterion were presented to experts and general population, with high agreement on literacy and education level, national income level, language, rural versus urban location for experts, and the general population also identifying literacy and education level, disability status, rural versus urban location. And most of the others were actually highlighted by experts as well as being areas where machine learning models could fail for different people. So family income level, ethnic groups, skin tones, phenotypes, etc. So why is this important for health? Well, when it comes to electronic health records with limited data for retraining models, the representation and evaluation biases, especially in instances when data used to train the model is not representative of different populations, like dermatology classifiers, which look at skin diseases, may not work for darker skin tones. Another example we can take is transcription agents, which look at medical speech. So if you're speaking into ChatGPT to transcribe or translate what you're saying, it's impacted by your accent, your style of speaking, your language, and this can impact language disparities and literacy. And there are very good startups on the continent that are trying to solve this by increasing data representation and training their own models and selling those to clinics. And we asked the question as part of this, what would be the perceived or envisioned effects of colonial history on AI? And this was motivated by the decolonizing global health movement and the algorithmic colonialism literature. So when it comes to global health, it's usually defined as a collaborative transnational research and action for promoting health for all. But usually knowledge generated from high-income countries tends to define practices and informs thinking to the detriment of knowledge systems in low and middle-income countries. So this elephant in the room where people come in with altruistic motives and a bit blind to coloniality, lack of inclusion, and racism. Machine learning models are developed with a lot of large language models, and machine learning models are developed with problem formulation, resources, and data from high-income countries, which is why it's important that local institutions develop their own models and evaluate their own models, because there's the concern that they will be imported with little regulation to low and middle income countries, further exacerbate current power imbalances, and risk algorithmic colonialism. And Berani, who I cite here, is very well known for her work in algorithmic colonialism. So we asked the general population on how likely they thought AI would be a force for empowerment in Africa, and most of them said they thought it was highly likely. This is sorted by country, so 72% indicated this, but you can see that between countries there's differences. So Kenyans were much more optimistic, South Africans were much more pessimistic, and that's probably because of the power imbalances that already exist in South Africa, and in Ghana it was a response of about 67%. We also asked how likely AI will empower high-income countries at the expense of sub-Saharan Africa. And mostly unilaterally, all the countries felt like it would empower high-income countries at the expense of sub-Saharan Africa. And then we asked quite a number of questions, but the final one I'll show here is we asked whether they felt there was a connection between AI and colonialism to the general population. And the dark indicates a definite yes, and the light is a maybe. So definite yes for general population was low, with maybes a bit high, especially for South Africa. But comparing the general population response to experts, we find that most experts think there is or there could be a connection between AI and colonialism. Based on our expert interviews, we defined, not just from us making these up, we actually collected this from the 50 experts we interviewed. We defined these areas to look forward to for socially inclusive development of health applications in AI, particularly in former colonial spaces. So one is to make AI socially beneficial for countries in Africa, and we got a number of quotes like that, so that was quite obvious. The careful adoption of AI applications, and this quote says, if AI is actually built responsibly, considering biases and instilled with the community that is being targeted, then it could actually reach a lot of these communities and make health accessible. On specific methods for preventing colonial tendencies, promoting agency and ownership, we go a lot more into this in one of our papers. But a summary quote here is that building from scratch together with communities builds trust. It builds the ownership of the development of that process, and that will do away with the decolonizing of healthcare. But I'll take this a step further and say, not just building together with the communities, but communities building their own models as well. And then there was another theme that came up on the fact that to achieve these social benefits for AI for Africa, there might need to be massive restructuring. So the quote on here is that not without dismantling and deconstructing the systems and processes by which data is used to feed or build algorithms and predictive models. And another person said that there are movements of AI for good, but when you look at it critically and unpack intentions, They are built on oppression and injustice, and it might not end up being used for social good. So we have about 3 publications on this that look at colonization, fairness, and the NTIAS study that is publicly available. And to tie this back to what we were talking about in the morning on generative AI and superintelligence, benefits here could be that pre-trained models reduce the amount of data that we need, which is a benefit to data scarce areas. So if there's not a lot of digitized data, you need a lot less data on a pre-trained model. Reducing clinical burden with administrative, diagnostic, and decision support. Potentially, it could be a first step in a patient's journey and enable more time for clinicians to focus on patients. And there's a book that I think is titled How AI Will Make Health Human Again and Give Clinicians Time to Interact with Their Patients. So I think we're already seeing some of that with some of the transcription services that allow clinicians to not just take notes, but really interact with patients. But we need to make sure those work as well with our dialects, with our accents. It could help develop methods for better early detection of preventable diseases and epidemic outbreaks. And as we had mentioned before in the morning, help discover new drugs for currently uncurable diseases. But there are also risks involved, as I've outlined. There's been great strides with generative AI, but there's still a lot of hallucinations and a lot of incorrectness. So if it's being used in health areas, it must be carefully assessed, and you kind of don't know where it's going to go wrong. There's also the potential to exacerbate inequities and the biases we talked about with limited accuracy if the data and use case is not represented in training. And bias and local performance needs to be studied before AI is deployed. And the black box system limits transparency and accountability, which hinder applications in healthcare. So this wraps up my talk. I know I've thrown a lot of applications at you, but the key takeaways that I want you to take, if nothing at all, is to solve problems that matter for you and that matter to your communities, whether it's within the superintelligence area, AGI, AI generally, or outside of that. It's solve problems that matter to you, and don't be afraid to explore the unexplored. AGI, superintelligence, is new. It's currently a hypothesis under research development. If this is something you're interested in further researching to ensure it works for you, don't be afraid to check that out and make an impact. Try to bring it back to the community. So thank you so much for having me today, and I'd love to take your questions.
Shall we please give it up to her again? Thank you very much, Dr. Mercy Nyamewa Esiedu, for delivering the second lecture in the 13th RP Baffour Memorial Lectures. Just like we did in the morning, we'll take questions for her to address, and then we prepare for the final lecture on Saturday. So if we have questions on her lecture, which she just delivered, our ushers will help us take the microphones around, and then a set of 5 questions she answers, and then we take it up from there. Oh, okay, we have the microphones mounted, just like we did in the morning. So if you have a question, please go behind the microphone. We had a very good session in the morning. The participation was very, very, very impressive. Let's hope to do so in the second lecture. Are you coming to ask a question, please? All right, so let's go. Please put the microphone on. And
Okay. Thank you very much. My question is quite simple. So we've realized that most LLMs and even multimodal language models perform quite better, ideally on single data points. So how do you tackle, in the cases that you've mentioned, how do you tackle time series data or medical diagnostics where, for example, EEG, ECG, these data are continuous, right? They are not discrete that LLM can just pick and then make some prognosis about it. But in a case where data is continuously evolving, there are a lot of periodic changes. How is the LLM being accurately being able to, make some decision out of it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, let's take your question.
Thank you. Please, my name is Joseph Peprabwaten.
Can you please speak up? Get closer to the microphone.
My name is Joseph Peprabwaten from the Department of Religion and Human Development. Yes. And my question is, looking at, from the presentation, talking about AGI and then ASI, my question is, are these coming up to mitigate the ethical concerns that already exist with the usage of AI narrow intelligence? That's my question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have anyone coming up with a question? Okay, so our speaker kindly do us the honors of coming up stage to address those two questions.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for your questions. So the first question was that how do LLMs perform on time series data, so longitudinal data? And you're right, they don't do very well on time series data, even though sentences, you can imagine a sentence as a sequential data set, so it has something that follows the other. And one would expect LLMs to also be able to take in other types of time series data. So instead, what we've done is actually develop time series specific foundation models that are trained on vast amounts of these longitudinal numerical time series data sets. And those are open, so the idea is you can use those and have them interact with language-based large language models or foundation models. The other way that people have used time series data sets with LLMs is to try to tokenize them into what the LLMs understand, but that doesn't work as well as having to train a foundation model that is time series specific, and that lends periodic changes. So for wearables specifically, we actually have some papers out on sensor LLM and personal health PH LLM that are open and that can be used. The second question was, are these coming up? Oh, I see. Are ASI and AGI coming up to mitigate ethical concerns with artificial narrow intelligence? And no, this is not why they are being developed. They are being developed so they can achieve superhuman intelligence. And the hope is that we can get them aligned to human values and reduce ethical concerns before it becomes superhuman. So it would be good to start now and incorporate debiasing methods, incorporate data sets that are representative, starting with narrow intelligence systems and what some people call seed AI or smaller LLMs before they become super intelligent and don't want to listen to humans.
Do we have any more questions? Well, it doesn't look like, so we'll take a musical interlude and wrap up.
Should I say something to close out?
All right, hold on, please. So let's wrap up there.
As we wrap up the day, I guess I just wanted to say thank you so much for your attention in the morning and this evening. It's been great interacting with you, and thank you to the university, to the VC, to the chairman, Nana chairman, to everyone who came to support, the professors and faculty, staff in the room, as well as students. So I really hope we can find ways to collaborate with the university, and I look forward to continued conversations on the topic of superintelligence and AI applications that are contextual and locally relevant. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. For his closing remarks, ladies and gentlemen, I humbly invite once again the chairman of the Governing Council, KNUST. Please welcome Echamfo Asafo Boache Ajiman Bonsu.
Please sit down. Mercy, again, let me thank you. You've done an incredible job. And I'm so excited. I have a number of questions to the participants that are here. And I'll start with Jerry, Professor of AI. Jerry, you heard Mercy talk about biased data and how that can impact the use of AI tools. What would be your recommendation to the Health Facilities Regulatory Agency in terms of deployment of AI in Ghana? What would be your recommendation? Jerry. Who else would want to answer a question? Alumni, global alumni. Daniel. The Medical and Dental Council needs to advocate for use of AI-assisted tools to avoid medical errors. What will be the approach that the dental or medical and dental councils should take? And I'll be getting my answers right now before we close. Mercy mentioned MedPower. That's one of the Google's medical stuff that you're working on. And the challenge we have with the use of those international models, we elaborated so much in the morning, most of all because they are biases, and that results in hallucinations in some cases. How can we remedy this if we need to apply AI tools in our country? I have 3 questions, and I'll need 3 responses before we close. Jerry, I will start with you. Sometimes I feel like saying colleagues. It's quite impressive in terms of what we can do with artificial intelligence. But I think listening to the lecture all this morning, this afternoon, I think what is critical is that a lot of the work that's being done by, for example, Google and other AI model developers, if you look at the results for the applications that Mercy presented, there's one thing that runs through, and that is what I would want to emphasize as a major takeaway for us as KNUST. If we look at it, what runs through is that there wasn't a single discipline that was doing all this work on the models. They are always multidisciplinary, always. So if I go and I'm always calling Jerry Professor AI. He might not have all the answers that I might need. But if I go to Provost for College of Engineering or Built Environment, and I ask them to collaborate with Jerry, we have had some solutions that would take Jerry maybe 5 years to come by. But with that collaboration, working across disciplines, we can really get solutions quickly. So in responding to my question to Jerry, I think what I would say is that we may have to request through our policy dialogue with government that the Health Facilities Regulatory Agency should always request that any AI tool that is to be deployed in the country for medical applications must go through algorithmic impact assessment. Just to validate, to cross-check whether the data that has been used for the development of that particular model is in sync with our models or our data at local level. And just coming back again, I would still emphasize the idea that we need to look at how this cross-faculty, cross-college collaboration can be strengthened to support and develop our own local models. Because if I need models for prediction in terms of how much cocoa I can produce by the end of the year from my 5-acre, 10-acre farm, I mean, do you think a model prepared in the US would respond to that simple question for me, or better respond to that simple question? But if I have, where's Kabi? No, not Kabi, natural resources. See, Provost is not here. Okay. But if I had worked with College of Natural Resources, Agriculture and Natural Resources, maybe those answers could have been easier and more customized to my local needs, and therefore would help me to have a better prediction in terms of how much I need to do on cocoa. Take it for all the other crops that will not do well in the temperate areas. But then Jerry knows that if he's using AI-assisted irrigation systems, he could increase crop output. But then would Jerry know what type of soils will support that output? So Jerry will need to talk to our colleagues from Agric and Natural Resources to look at the type of soils, where do we grow, and how can we maximize the use of AI to actually also optimize the production of crops. So it's very critical that we always need to think that we're interdisciplinary across to make AI more useful and more helpful for our communities. Your chairman is AI freak. And I told you in the morning that I wish I was 13. Because there's so much data out there that is very, very interesting. So I would encourage all of us, faculty members, students, the young and old, let's embrace artificial intelligence. It won't harm us. Yeah? But it will be a pity if we get colonized, because we're preparing the raw materials for others to use and bring us a product that we get to the market and buy chocolate to come and eat in Ghana. whilst we're producing cocoa in Ghana to export. That's what we'll be doing if we don't embrace AI. We'll still be feeding the world with our raw materials, and they'll come back to sell those products to us at higher prices. My people, it's time for us all to get up and work. Emerging technologies are emerging, they are coming and they will go. But we need to go with them. If we don't, we'll be left behind. Thank you very much, Mercy, for these thought-provoking and very educative lectures. And we look forward to your final series, the third one, Saturday. And faculty, Vice-Chancellor, Pro-Vice-Chancellor, council members that are present here, and everyone, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
So on Saturday morning at 9 a.m., Mercy will deliver her third and final lecture on the topic Superintelligence, History, Current State, and Future for Diverse World. It promises to be exciting. The unfortunate thing is that we wouldn't have an opportunity for questions, so take note. And that particular one will be chaired by His Royal Majesty Otumfuo Osei Tutu II, Asantehene and Chancellor of KNUST. I know even without an invitation, way before 9 o'clock, this whole place will be filled up. Please let's take note of the following announcements. The special invited guest and the speaker will converge at number 3 VC's Lodge for a special session. The rest of us, members of convocation, will meet at the senior staff clubhouse, and you, the students, will have to stay behind in the Great Hall for your meeting. Nana, Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to acknowledge some dignitaries who graced this occasion, and I will begin with Mercy's husband. In the morning, I did, but they were out of the hall. Now he is here. Please applaud Jonathan Nathan Kulo. And then Mercy's son, Ethan Nana Kwejo Esa Kulo. In the morning, he sat there delivering his own lecture, so his dad had to take him out. Thank you very much for coming. Also, members of the governing council here present, we thank you all for coming. Mr. K.A. Kakari, former council member and registrar of Garden City University, we acknowledge your presence. Pro-Vice Chancellor, Registrar, Finance Officer, Provost Directors, Deans, Heads of Department, staff and students, online participants, Chairman and members of the Public Lecture Committee, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you all for coming and attending this second lecture of the 13th RP Baffour lectures. Shall we please rise as I invite the Catholic chaplain to say the closing prayer.
Shall we pray? Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. Almighty and ever-living God, the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology is ever grateful to you for your blessings and favors upon our life, especially for granting us this opportunity to remember and acknowledge in a very special way, especially in this memorial lecture, Dr. R.P. Baffour, for his selfless dedication to the development of this university. We are ever grateful to you for this memorial lecture, helping us to leverage on AI, especially in our health, and also developing our dear nation and the entire world. We are grateful to you for the gift and life of Dr. Asiedu. We thank you for the intelligence, the graces that you have endowed her, and we thank you for the impact that she is making on humanity, and especially our healthcare delivery, and also for granting us the opportunity to be treated to this thought-provoking on leveraging on AI. It is our prayer that you continue to use her to bless humanity with greater things. As a university, we thank you for all our stakeholders and all those who contribute in diverse ways for making our university the #1 destination of quality education. Continue to grant the leadership, the management, staff, and students of this noble and prestigious university that we can continue to offer quality formation and training for ourselves to better our lot and the entire nation and humanity. We thank you for the planning committee, the organizers, and everybody who have had a hand in this organizing this memorial series. May you continue to bless the work of our hands. For all of us who are gathered here, it is our prayer that as we go about our activities, we will continue to think AI and how best it can facilitate our life in a very responsible manner. As we depart from here, carry each and every one of us to our destination safely and sound. May we continue to enjoy your blessings and favors. We make all these prayers through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Please remain standing for the recession of Council Chairman, the Vice Chancellor, and our Speaker. Okay. Thank you for coming. We may now leave.